Good evening. I'm Don Frazier, the director of the TexS Center at Schreiner University, and I would like to welcome you all to our annual TexS Talks. They're like TED Talks, but with an accent on Texas. Now, working in concert, the TexS Center is working in concert on this project with my good friend Matt Goodwin in the back and his team at the Mountaineer Leadership Academy, where they are training the leaders of tomorrow today. But tonight our focus is on how the Lone Star State has played an important role in exploring all the stars. Now, I find this fascinating because there's a story that resonates with me. When Texas became home to the Johnson Space Center in the early 1960s, it was making a conscious and important break with the past while embracing an exciting future. One of the salient features of the Houston area that made it such a good home to America's space program was its well-trained workforce and its institutions of higher learning. Rice University, at the time, was segregated, a throwback to an earlier age, and therefore ineligible for government contracts as a result. Its trustees rose to the challenge and responded with this, and I quote, "Rice University stands at the crossroads. It can go to the moon or it can return to the 19th century. In true Texas fashion, they rewrote their charter, forged ahead, and reached for the stars. As a result, the first words spoken from the moon were Houston. Tonight, we welcome veterans of our space program and fellow stellar explorers. We will hear from Gerald Griffin, an aeronautical engineer and the flight director for Apollo projects and director of the Johnson Space Center. We'll hear from Colonel Michael Fossum, astronaut and commander of the International Space Station. Also, we'll hear from Jeff Stone, the in-flight maintenance and flight controller for the Space Shuttle program and missions. And we will also hear from our very own physicist, Dr. Kim Arvidsson, who teaches astronomy here at Schreiner, and also will invite you to participate in a star party sometime soon. So I am told that space smells like burnt metal, like from a barbecue grill. That's an aroma the Texans know well. So perhaps this is another reason why we lead the nation in spacefaring. Now, a few housekeeping points. One is the presenters will not field your questions here. Save your questions until you mix and mingle in the beyond, meaning out there. So the questions are after the event. Yeah, not the great beyond, just the beyond. Yeah. While you're back there, check out the virtual reality experience in the fellowship hall. Now, the best line I've heard so far this evening was Colonel Fossum, who's been on the space station, oh, by the way, looking in his VR goggles saying, "I know that toilet." And the guy who trained me how to fix it is in the next room. So clearly it's a very realistic experience back there. At this point, please silence your cell phones, your unruly children, your comfort animals, whatever you have that's going to yap. Turn all that off because you won't want to miss a moment of what these guys are bringing to us tonight. Thank you, and Godspeed.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Quite an honor to be the person that kicks this whole series off. When Marta talked to me, she said, about doing this, she said, "I want you to just have a chat with the audience, except you can't talk back." And so it's, Don was exactly right. Texas has played a huge role in the space program, and not only did Houston Tranquility Base, the Eagle has landed, those famous words by Neil Armstrong, but there was also one by Jim Lovell on Apollo 13 said, "Houston, we've had a problem." So, which shows something that I kind of had a theme in this thing. We weren't perfect. Space flight is hard. It is tough business. It's extremely hard to get going fast enough to get into orbit. 25,000 feet a second, 17,000 miles an hour, you got to get moving. And you got to be up about 100 miles just to get to orbit. So it's a tough business. It can bite you really, really fast. I'm often asked the question, how did you get in the space business? And I'm going to try to really make it fast because it sets the stage for Apollo, which is what I'm really more known for, and it's also what I like the best job I ever had. Better than being the director of the center, was being in flight operations during those lunar landings. I graduated from Texas A&M in medieval times, 1956, and in the mid-50s, there was no aerospace curriculum. I majored in aeronautical engineering, everything from low-speed airplanes, high-speed airplanes, even hypersonic theory. Nothing had ever flown that fast. But it was kind of my first answer is getting into NASA at that time was hard. It was not an easy job. When I graduated, I had a 4-year commitment to the Air Force, and that was 1956, and there wasn't even a focused U.S. space program at that time. That all changed a year later, 1957, when Sputnik flew. The Soviet Union put up this 2-foot ball full of radios, antennas sticking out, going around the Earth, beeping. That's all it did, beep, beep, beep. But it was the first man-made satellite ever, and the race was on. At that point, this was the Cold War was raging. It got as close to being hot right in that period as any time in history. I actually, at the time that the Sputnik flew, I was actually in training in the Air Force, and NASA was formed the next year, in 1958. And by that time, I was in a fighter squadron in California and had a lot of fun turning jet fuel into noise. And but I had 2 more years to go, and I had a 4-year commitment. I couldn't get out. Right then, I knew I wanted to be at NASA because I knew where it was headed. And this was before Kennedy's speech. But I had to wait. And then when I got out of the Air Force, NASA, by that time, had already started Project Mercury, which was the one-man capsule I'm going to put in context here in a second. They were right in the middle of it, and they weren't hiring anybody. They were just trying to figure out how to get it off the ground. So I went to work for the Satellite Test Center, which was a United States Air Force facility, as a Lockheed Martin employee. Actually, it was Lockheed Missile and Space at that time. And guess what? We were trying to launch the first spy satellites to spy on Russia. And we put about as many as we got into orbit into the Pacific Ocean. That's where I learned that spaceflight was indeed very, very hard to do. But I got my feet wet with a little bit of the space mentality. Nothing like NASA would do later or anything like that. But at least Earth orbit was in a polar orbit. We were launching out of California where we could go polar and the world turning around you, you can see in 24 hours, you get a pretty good look at both sides of the earth, and we were trying to look at the other side. So I just kept knocking on NASA's door. And finally, in 1964, they let me in. I would have loved to have been an astronaut, but at that time they were mostly test pilots, which I wasn't. They were about 5 to 10 years older than most of us in mission control, by the way. They'd been around longer. And so anyway, I got into mission control, and from day one, I knew I was where I wanted to be. It was exciting. We just were starting the Gemini program. Now, Project Mercury was this one little capsule that so tight that the guys couldn't stretch out and make their body straight. It was that tight. Gemini was pretty much the same way, except a little larger, but it had 2 people in it. All we actually proved with Project Mercury was that a person could survive in 0G and survive reentry, survive exit and coming down. So that's about all we learned. We only flew 4 orbital flights. But Gemini, we learned a bunch. We learned how to rendezvous, how to dock, how to do EVAs, extravehicular activity. The press almost immediately called that spacewalk, and that's what you probably know it by, spacewalk. So it was a really learning experience in Gemini. And then Apollo. Now, all of those I consider Apollo. That was really getting us to the moon. And so I'm going to spend the rest of my time here on Apollo. And boy, what a time that was. We got off to a very, very rough start. And again, a lesson of how tough it is. We had a fire on a pad. We killed 3 astronauts. That was in January of 1967. I was a GN still doing the same job I had done in Gemini. I was a guidance, navigation, and control systems analyst. And I was getting ready to do the same thing for Apollo. And I was in the control center the night the fire happened, and it was over. So we didn't fly for almost 2 years. And in that period, Chris Kraft, who was our big leader in mission control, decided he needed 3 more flight directors, and he reached down and plucked me out and said, that's how simple it was, Mike, in those days. Today it takes a lot of training and certifications and all that to do. But Chris reached down, plucked me out, and said, you're going to be a flight director. What's a flight director? Flight director runs mission control. All of us, there were 6 of us that did, because we had to operate 24 hours and we had multiple missions. We were flying about every six months. So we had to have a number of people. There were 6 of us. And we worked ourselves to death. It was 24/7 a lot of the time. My son's in the back audience here somewhere. And I seldom got to see a baseball game, Little League game, or Cub Scouts, and all of that. And the point I want to make here is, and it's still true today, the spouses saved our life. They did everything because we were so darn busy. Flight director, all of us came up from the control center. We had been in various positions. And it's like moving from playing an instrument in an orchestra to being the director. You don't get to play the instruments anymore, but you make sure they all play together. And it was a very interesting job. You had to listen to a gazillion inputs, and you had the final go, no go decision to make on everything that was done. Now, you got help. You had help that people were telling you these are the options. And, of course, we all knew the systems well, the flight directors. And we trusted our guys to give us the right info. But it came down to only you in the final analysis had to make the go, no go, which we did from the ground on everything in Apollo. That's changing with time a little bit, and I think it should have as spaceflight matures. But in those days, we checked everything, every maneuver, everything. And it was so fun when it worked. There's 3 no-goes or goes that go-no-goes that I gave that will always be with me. One was the go for TLI, trans-lunar injection, the maneuver that sent us on our way to the moon. The first time I had that responsibility, it still sends chills up my back to think about when you say Capcom would go for TLI, and Capcom would radio up, you go for TLI. You're on your way to the moon. That was always kind of a gulp point, too. Uh-oh. We just sent them on their way to the moon. We got to get them back. The other one was Apollo 14 on landing. I was a flight controller, and we had a shorted switch that was going to make us abort if we didn't figure a way to get around it. And the guys at MIT went to work on it. We read up a bunch of numbers to the crew. They put it in through this keyboard, and we bypassed that switch. And when I said we'll go for PDI, we powered descent initiation, typical NASA, go for landing. I didn't think we were going to make it. And so that was, and then on Apollo 16, I did the landing. I did 3 of the 6 that we did on the moon. And we had a problem with the command module engine that did all the major maneuvers to get us into lunar orbit and out of it to come home. And we almost did miss that one because we were running out of orbits that we could get to the landing point. But anyway, when we finally figured a way to do it, and I never will forget, the program manager turned to me and he said, "What do you think?" And it was a fellow named Jim McDivitt, who was a former astronaut. And I said, "I think we're going to go for it." He said, "Have fun." And so you go for powered descent. Those 3 things, it almost made it worthwhile to go through all of that hard work and time and all of that. When I became a flight director, I was only 33 years old. And I was second from the youngest of the flight directors, all of us in our 30s, and we were the oldest people in the room. We had flight controllers that were 22, 23, making critical calls. So it showed you what the country could do without literally starting from nothing to what we got to in Apollo. And although you'll see a zillion photos and television and all that where we look grim and like we're really concerned, let me tell you a secret. It was a hoot. It was fun, even when things weren't going well, except for the fire. Of course, that was not a launch. It wasn't a flight. It was on the pad. But when things weren't going right, it was about as much fun as it was when they were going right. Now, you didn't think that at the time, but when I thought back about it, that's why we were there. That's why we were there. So I really think the bottom line is this country can do anything it wants to when it puts its mind to it. And we did it. We showed that, and we beat the Soviet Union to the moon by quite a lot. Actually, when we orbited the moon on Apollo 8, which we just sent up at Christmas time, and they orbited the moon, came home, they read Genesis in that process, and that threw Madeleine O'Hare into a fit. But anyhow, it was, over. The space race was over when we orbited the moon. We didn't know it, but the CIA did. They had had a terrible explosion. And they had their flight control unit close to the launch pad. And the explosion was so large that it not only got the big vehicle they were going to go to the moon with, it also got about half of that building, killed a bunch of people. So anyway, it was a fun time. And then we started doing something else. And at this point, I'm going to say, Mike Fossum, my good friend, astronaut, leader, is going to come up and kind of pick it up from here and take you to shuttle in the ISS. Mike?
Thank you, Gerry. Howdy. Oh, there's not many Aggies in here. That's okay. That's okay. No, it's what an honor for me to be here tonight and to follow this national hero, which truly Gerry Griffin is. Yeah. I want to recall a very historic, worldwide historic event that happened in October of 1957, and Gerry already mentioned it. That's when the Russians, the Soviets, orbited the first object around the Earth. 2 months later, December 1957, another very historic date for only me, because that's when I was born. That I was a strange kid that loved science and starting off with the outdoors and stuff. But I really grew up with the space age. My dad was really a sharecropper who didn't go to college, who was injured in an accident, ended up as a livestock inspector and stuff. We grew up in McAllen, Texas, down on the southern border, but my dad really thought this space stuff was cool. And I, grew up watching the early space missions. I was that geek kid. While Gerry was doing the real work, I had my chart plots out in front of the TV, and I'm marking the orbit for Apollo 8 going around the moon and stuff. And it's like, they're really doing it, they're really doing it. And I vividly remember July 1969 when we landed on the moon. What an amazing thing it was. We beat the Soviet Union. We really did it. Hard to believe. And I remember, late that night they did the moonwalk, and I remember watching that with my dad and family on a little grainy black and white TV, and they're lighting up cigars, and I was, watching this as they did the moonwalk, and the transmission ended, and they got back inside the spacecraft, and I walked out into my backyard in South Texas and looked up at the moon that was hanging over my house, shaking with excitement, disbelief, and just exultation too that we'd actually done it. I just watched two Americans put footprints on that moon hanging over my backyard. This impossible dream took shape in the back of my mind, and I said, I want to do that too. I want to reach for the stars. And now that's crazy talk, folks. That's absolutely crazy talk. And I had no idea, how to do that or anything else, but it just, that mind, it came to me, and it was, I actually believe, a spiritual calling through the years and through the journey. I found out fairly quickly you don't talk about things like that because people laugh hysterically. My own family laughed, and so I quit talking. I didn't believe it. Grew up, I wasn't a top student in high school. I had a high school teacher that drove me 400 miles to visit A&M. Me and a couple of buddies said, "You're going to be an engineer, Mike. You just don't know it yet. You're going to be an Aggie engineer." He drove us 400 miles to go visit the campus. Said, "I'm going here." The only way I could afford it was an ROTC scholarship, so we had kind of that same thing. I figured 4 years of education, 4 years of service, I'll be out of my way. So went to A&M, graduated in mechanical engineering, commissioned into the Air Force, convinced them to send me to graduate school first. That was a good deal, paid for my first master's degree. And then I convinced the Air Force to do something. It was kind of an outrageous move. I drove from Dayton, Ohio to the Air Force Personnel Center in San Antonio and convinced the career manager there to loan me over to Johnson Space Center. So I was loaned over. I wore civilian clothes for 3 years. The center director was, Mr. Gerry Griffin. So, and his twin brother was also working there. Was the senior Air Force guy on site. So I got there. For the first shuttle flight, I was in graduate school. The second shuttle flight, I was on the beach in Florida watching it, dreaming about maybe getting a job down there. The third space shuttle flight, I was working in mission control. So I was ended up being kind of a crew procedure specialist and stuff. And what an amazing thing. I'm working at NASA. It was so cool. Be an astronaut? Oh, good gosh, man! No, those guys are gods. They're still gods, and I loved what I was doing. My office was just down the hall from the astronaut office. And after working, I'm kind of slow. It took me about a year or so, or about a year, and I realized, wait a minute, they're not gods, right? They're normal people with an outrageous job. They're good at what they do. They're smart. They work hard. They got a sense of humor. Most would admit to an element of luck, but they weren't that different from me. And two of the early shuttle astronauts had an engineering background like me, and Ellison Onizuka, who perished on the Challenger accident, and Gerry Ross, who's still a very dear friend, both had been through that Air Force flight test engineer, test pilot school route. They both convinced me to apply and go, and so I left after just 3 years at NASA. And I was ready to get out of the Air Force and stay there forever, be a civil servant. I'm working at NASA. This is the best thing ever. But I said, why not? And both of those guys, heroes, friends of mine, said, it'll be good for you. No matter what you do, no matter what you decide to do, it'll be good for you. So I went to that, and I left NASA, the place I love, Texas, the place I love, and hauled my wife and out to California. I did flight tests in California and then Nevada for 8 years. Finally, it's time to come home. Truth is, NASA had already rejected me 3 times. I'd already been called down and interviewed, and I didn't get it. 3 strikes, I'm out. It's time to go home. And moved to Houston, got a job as a civilian at NASA. And during that time, I helped design the International Space Station. There was a big redesign going on in the early 90s. Crazy times, bringing the Russians in as partners and things like that. All of my aerospace background, my early NASA background helped out. And then after, a few more years, and do you think I quit trying? No, of course I didn't quit trying. So finally, after 13 years of applying, 7 applications, on my 5th interview, I was selected as an astronaut. I was fortunate to fly 2 space shuttle missions then. On those space shuttle missions, I was a spacewalker, and I got to help build the space station that I'd helped design. Amazing. I did a total of 7 spacewalks for 48 hours working outside on the space station. And it was very, very physical, very mental, very challenging kind of endeavor. And then about 11 years ago, I accepted another mission. Well, I actually accepted it 2.5 years before, because it took a very long training flow to live on the space station for a long haul. Not a 2-week shuttle mission, but almost 6 months on the space station. The hard part, I had to learn Russian because I was launching on a Russian rocket from Kazakhstan. That was the hard part by a lot, trying to teach an old dog like me in his 50s how to speak and be actually proficient in a very foreign language like Russian was challenging. I wish Spain or Mexico had been a major partner instead. I'd have a much better chance. But what an adventure that was to launch in June of 2011 from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. Little footnote about that particular launch, we've talked about Yuri Gagarin being the first human in space. He launched in April of 1961 when he became the first human in space and indeed to orbit. We had not put anybody up even suborbital yet. The launch pad that I launched from in 2011, 50 years after Yuri Gagarin launched, was his launch pad. The same one. The Russians don't throw anything away. Okay? No, it works. Don't mess with it. There's long discussion about the design concepts that they use and stuff, but what an adventure that was. The shuttle was huge. It was a great big truck. The Soyuz is a very small total. The capsule that the people were in was just 4 cubic meters. And it was just like the early, not quite, no, it was darn near like Gemini. You're laying on your back, 3 of us, our knees kind of lashed up, kind of close to your chest, and you are literally hip to hip, touching and elbow to elbow with the crewmates that are next to you. But what an adventure. We launched. 2 days later, we docked to the space station. I'm back. I've been here a few times. Oh, they've added this since I left. And what an amazing thing. With an international crew, I joined a crew of 2 Russians and 1 American. I launched with another Russian and a Japanese rookie astronaut. It's always fun to fly with rookies because their eyes are huge. Everything's new for the first time. As we get up there, worked on over, for almost 6 months, we worked on over 200 different scientific experiments while we're there. and as well as doing, maintenance and repairs and just care and feeding for the space station. In the end, I was supposed to hand over or be joined by, when the senior guys left, I became the commander of Expedition 29. The rest of my crew was supposed to be there 2 weeks later, but there was a rocket failure. The Russians dropped a cargo ship into Siberia, and very almost identical to the rocket they launched humans on. So the rest of my crew was delayed by over 2 months. So that we were very short-handed with just 3 of us running a space station. They finally got there, and we had 4 days to hand over a $120 billion space station. We didn't sleep much during that time, got it handed over. I could bring about 2 pounds of personal stuff with me. It was almost 100% Aggie stuff and scouting stuff, a lot of Eagle badges and things like that. So it was, an amazing, adventure there. And when I finished that last mission, I was still on flight status. And I will always want to fly again. I worked in a management role, senior management role within the flight crew operations there, where I was supporting crews in training, going back and forth to Russia and Kazakhstan, and spending a lot of time back in mission control. Whenever that call came in, we got a problem, what are we going to do? I was in there at midnight trying to figure out how we're going to, bypass that or get this. What do we have on board? It was literally, we joked about it, but it was those Apollo 13 minutes. We'd go into a room and say, what does the crew have to work with that they can use to repair a treadmill? Or a heat shield. We peeled off some of the, part of the heat shield on one of the shuttle missions, and so one of the senior spacewalkers, and I was in there working. We ended up using medical staples, it was a cloth covered on the top part of the shuttle. And the crew member outside, we tried a lot of different things, but we proved that, you could do it. And we actually tested it, the concept. We were working on it in Houston just day and night for about 4 days. And then we ran up to College Station where they've got the wind tunnel. And we had a jig made in the meantime to put in that wind tunnel. So I'm up there just wearing gloves, not the whole suit. But, and then, do a repair, taking film and everything. And then we'd put it in the wind tunnel, spin it up, did it hold, or not. And then I was driving home. We called the information into Mission Control. I was driving home to get to Mission Control from College Station, talking to the Capcom in Mission Control as he's talking the crew through the procedure we had just proven. So that's what you call ingenuity, folks. A comment was made about the bravery of people that fly. I will tell you that the bravest people involved, rocket launchers are amazing, horrific. The amount of energy that's harnessed to get you into space in a shuttle, it was 8.5 minutes. The Soyuz was about 9 minutes. It's a horrific amount of energy, and there's a lot of room for things to not go right. What does it take to climb on that rocket? Going uphill on my first shuttle flight, it was a mix. Part of me was the professional that had been trained and hardened for years, being beat up in the simulators, watching all my instruments and my stuff, looking for the failure, trying to get ahead of things and stuff. And the other part of me was that 12-year-old kid going, yeehaw! We're really doing it. The bravest people involved are not the ones on top of the rocket. They're not the ones that are sitting at the pointy end. The bravest people involved in a rocket launch are the people that are watching somebody they love climb on top of a bomb. I'm eternally grateful to my wife and my kids and my mother, who I put through that multiple times. And it's been my joy to live this mission, the dream that I had as a child, to do this, to carry that flag, to carry the flag of Texas up there also. And now that's what brings me to be a vice president of Texas A&M University, running the special purpose campus in Galveston. I lived my dream. Now my new mission is to help other young people live their dream, to follow their path to the stars or wherever their path may lead. Thank you very much.